Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. This bill isn't dopey, Mr Speaker. This is a good, practical, common sense, positive bill. And what it does is it reverses Stephen Joyce's wrong answer in search of a problem when he ran through the Education Amendment Bill number 2, which reduced the mandatory student and staff appointees to the university councils. Now, it's not dopey to have, as we've had suggested from other members, students and staff represented on those councils. And Mr Speaker, I think it's a frankly ridiculous argument. The last speaker said, well, he supported student and staff representatives. He thought it was, quote, a bloody good idea, but it shouldn't be mandatory. Now, you could use and apply exactly the same logic for the ministerial appointments. They're a good idea, possibly a bloody good idea, but why make them mandatory? You make them mandatory because you want to see those voices around that table. Now, Mr Speaker, what we did see is when Stephen Joyce made those massively unpopular changes to the university, Wananga and Polytech councils, there was massive opposition. I remember on the select committee, the response of the 1,037 written submissions, there were 5. There are only 5 who supported the government's change. What we saw is the unions, the universities, the vice-chancellors, mayors coming out opposing this change. And I want to congratulate the member, the Honourable David Cunliffe, for putting this bill on the ballot, for having it drawn. It is a good bill to go back to make sure that we have student and staff voices around those tables. This Restoration of Democracy bill is a good bill which I hope can pass, because what we know is that when you remove those student and staff voices, you reduce the institutional and academic freedom, you remove the protection that those voices bring around the table to the role of universities as the critic and the conscience of our society. They ensure diversity. They ensure that those voices which are critical, you may just see them as customers, but it's crucial to have those customers' perspectives around those tables, or you risk getting bushwhacked, as the last member put it. Now, I call it Stephen Joyce's wrong answer in search of a problem because there was no problem. There was no evidence presented from any of the government members at the time why we had to massively scale back these councils from 20 to 8 to 12. No reason why we had to remove the student and staff positions, because what we've replaced them with, of course, is appointed positions. Now, I believe in democracy, and I believe those positions should be elected by their peers, and that's not what we've seen in all those cases. But what we saw was an ideological solution in search of a problem, because they presented no evidence. In fact, they ignored all the evidence, because when you look at some of the top performing universities, who I'm sure the government members would like to see us following, MIT, how many have they got? It's not 12, it's 70. Cambridge, how many have they got? Well, it's not 12, it's 30. Now, when you look at the data of corporates in New Zealand and Australia, in fact, it's larger boards which are bringing a bigger dividend and better financial success than smaller boards. What Stephen Joyce ended up doing was somehow confusing and conflating good management practices with good governance practices. Now, these councils are governance bodies that hear from everyone, incorporating some of those strategic decisions. Secondly, what this good bill does is reverse more Joyce meddling in our tertiary education sector. Now, we used to hear a lot about nanny state in New Zealand. Nanny state, to me, is Stephen Joyce deciding how to spend the students' levy. Nanny state, for me, is Stephen Joyce deciding who's going to be on all those university councils with those ministerial appointments. I support students, I support staff and their voices being elected by their peers around those councils, and ultimately that's how we're going to get better decision making, a better, high quality tertiary education sector. Lastly, I want to touch on the track record of the minister who's been making those ministerial appointments rather than the staff, rather than the students. Now, I remember speaking in previous debates looking at Minister Joyce's poor track record of this comes out of the New Zealand University Students Association submission. Of all the appointments, there were 30, only 5 were women. Of those 30, only 1 was Māori, none were Pacifica. 2/3 were CEOs, company directors, accountants, and what we haven't been seeing is those students, the staff, the Māori, the Pacifica, the community voices around those university council tables, and that's why the Green Party is proud to support this bill.
David Bennett.